Chapter 9 of Allan and the Holy Flower. This recording is in the public domain. Allan and the Holy Flower by H. Rider Haggard. Chapter 9. Bausi, the King. About midday we made a start for Beza town where King Bausi lived, which we understood we ought to reach on the following evening. For some hours the regiment marched in front, or rather round us, but as we complained to Babemba of the noise and dust, with a confidence that was quite touching, he sent it on ahead. First, however, he asked us to pass our word "by our mothers," which was the most sacred of oaths among many African peoples, that we would not attempt to escape. I confess that I hesitated before giving an answer, not being entirely enamoured of the Mazitu and of our prospects among them, especially as I had discovered through Jerry that the discomfited Imbozwi had departed from the soldiers on some business of his own. Had the matter been left to me, indeed, I should have tried to slip back into the bush over the border, and there put in a few months' shooting during the dry season, while working my way southwards. This, too, was the wish of the Zulu hunters, of Hans, and I need not add, Sammy. But when I mentioned the matter to Stephen, he implored me to abandon the idea. "Look here, Quatermain," he said, "I have come to this God-forsaken country to get that great Cypripedium, and get it I will, or die in the attempt. Still," he added, after surveying our rather blank faces, "I have no right to play with your lives, so if you think the thing too dangerous I will go on alone with this old boy Babemba. Putting everything else aside, I think that one of us ought to visit Bausi's kraal, in case the gentleman who you call Brother John should turn up there. In short, I have made up my mind, so it's no use talking." I lit my pipe, and for quite a time contemplated this obstinate young man while considering the matter from every point of view. Finally I came to the conclusion that he was right and I was wrong. It was true that by bribing Babemba or otherwise there was still an excellent prospect of effecting a masterly retreat and of avoiding many perils. On the other hand, we had not come to this wild place in order to retreat. Further, at whose expense had we come here? At that of Stephen Somers, who wished to proceed. Lastly, to say nothing of the chance meeting of Brother John, to whom I felt no obligation since he'd given us the slip at Durban, I did not like the idea of being beaten. We had started out to visit some mysterious savages who worshipped a monkey and a flower, and we might as well go on till circumstances were too much for us. After all, dangers are everywhere. Those who turn back because of dangers will never succeed in any life that we can imagine. "Mavovo," I said presently, pointing to Stephen with my pipe, "the Inkoosi Wazela does not wish to try to escape. He wishes to go on to the country of the Pongo people if we can get there. And, Mavovo, remember that he has paid for everything. We are his hired servants. Also that he says that if we run back he will walk forward alone with these Mazitus. Still, if any of you hunters desire to slip off, he will not look your way, nor shall I. What say you?" "I say, Macumazahn, that though young, Wazela is a chief with a great heart, and that where you and he go, I shall go also, as I think will the rest of us. I do not like these Mazitu, for if their fathers were Zulus, their mothers were Low people. They are bastards, and of the Pongo I hear nothing but what is evil. Still, no good ox ever turns in the yoke because of a mud hole. Let us go on, for if we sink in the swamp, what does it matter? Moreover, my Snake tells me that we shall not sink, at least not all of us." So it was arranged that no effort should be made to return. Sammy, it is true, wished to do so, but when it came to the point, and he was offered one of the remaining donkeys and as much food and ammunition as he could carry, he changed his mind. "I think it better, Mr. Quatermain," he said, "to meet my end in the company of high-born, lofty souls, than to pursue a lonely career towards the inevitable in unknown circumstances." "Very well put, Sammy," I answered, "so while waiting for the inevitable, please go and cook the dinner." Having laid aside our doubts, we proceeded on the journey comfortably enough, being well provided with bearers to take the place of those who had run away. Babemba, accompanied by a single orderly, travelled with us, and from him we collected much information. It seemed that the Mazitu were a large people who could muster from 5,000 to 7,000 spears. Their tradition was that they came from the south and were of the same stock as the Zulus, of whom they had heard vaguely. Indeed, many of their customs, to say nothing of their language, resembled those of that country. Their military organization, however, was not so thorough, and in other ways they struck me as a lower race. In one particular, it is true, that of their houses, they were more advanced, for these, as we saw in the many kraals that we passed, were better built, with doorways through which one could walk upright, instead of the Kaffir bee-holes. We slept in one of these houses on our march, and should have found it very comfortable had it not been for the innumerable fleas which at length drove us out into the courtyard. For the rest, these Mazitu much resembled the Zulus. They had kraals and were breeders of cattle. They were ruled by headmen under the command of a supreme chief or king. They believed in witchcraft and offered sacrifice to the spirits of their ancestors. Also in some kind of a vague and mighty god who dominated the affairs of the world and declared his will through the doctors. Lastly, they were, and I dare say still are, a race of fighting men who loved war and raided the neighbouring peoples upon any and every pretext, killing their men and stealing their women and cattle. They had their virtues too, being kindly and hospitable by nature, though cruel enough to their enemies. Moreover, they detested dealing in slaves and those who practised it, saying that it was better to kill a man than to deprive him of his freedom. Also they had a horror of cannibalism which is so common in the dark regions of Africa, and for this reason more than any other loathed the Pongo folk, who were supposed to be eaters of men. On the evening of the second day of our march, during which we had passed through a beautiful and fertile upland country, very well watered, and except in the valleys free from bush, we arrived at Beza. This town was situated on a wide plain surrounded by low hills and encircled by a belt of cultivated land made beautiful by the crops of maize and other cereals, which were then ripe to harvest. It was fortified in a way. That is, a tall, unclimbable palisade of timber surrounded the entire town, which fence was strengthened by prickly pears and cacti planted on its either side. Within this palisade the town was divided into quarters more or less devoted to various trades. Thus one part of it was called the ironsmiths' quarter, another the soldiers' quarter, another the quarter of the land tillers, another that of the skin dressers, and so on. The king's dwelling and those of his women and dependents were near the north gate, and in front of these, surrounded by a semicircle of huts, was a wide space into which cattle could be driven if necessary. This, however, at the time of our visit was used as a market and a drilling ground. We entered the town, that must in all have contained a great number of inhabitants, by the south gate, a strong log structure facing a wooded slope through which ran a road. Just as the sun was setting we marched to the guest huts up a central street lined with the population of the place who had gathered to stare at us. These huts were situated in the soldiers' quarter, not far from the king's house, and surrounded by an inner fence to keep them private. None of the people spoke as we passed them, for the Mazitu are polite by nature. Also it seemed to me that they regarded us with awe tempered by curiosity. They only stared, and occasionally those of them who were soldiers saluted us by lifting their spears. The huts into which we were introduced by Babemba, with whom we had grown very friendly, were good and clean. Here all our belongings, including the guns which we had collected just before the slaves ran away, were placed in one of the huts over which a Mazitu mounted guard, the donkeys being tied to the fence at a little distance. Outside this fence stood another armed Mazitu, also on guard. "Are we prisoners here?" I asked of Babemba. "The king watches over his guests," he answered enigmatically. "Have the white lords any message for the king, who I am summoned to see this night?" "Yes," I answered. "Tell the king that we are the brethren of him who more than a year ago cut a swelling from his body, whom we have arranged to meet here. I mean the white lord with a long beard, who among you black people is called Dogeetah." Babemba started. "You are the brethren of Dogeetah? How comes it then that you never mentioned his name before, and when is he going to meet you here? Know that Dogeetah is a great man among us, for with him alone of all men the king has made blood brotherhood. As the king is, so is Dogeetah among the Mazitu." "We never mentioned him because we do not talk about everything at once, Babemba. As to when Dogeetah will meet us, I am not sure. I am only sure that he is coming." "Yes, Lord Macumazahn, but when? When? That is what the king will want to know, and that is what you must tell him. Lord," he added, dropping his voice,